Hi guys, here we are back with Chapter 8. We're going to talk about organizational culture, structure, and design. Essentially, we're going to talk about two different things. Culture, organizational culture, it's an area that I'm really specifically very interested in, and is, I think, an important topic for everybody to understand. And also, organizational structure, basically, what's the reporting structure of the organization, uh, how our departments divided up, and then how those two things influence each other. Okay, so organizational culture is no different than what we talk about in culture and society. There's a U.S. culture, there's a French culture, there's a Canadian culture, that kind of thing. Organizations are the same thing. It's a shared set of beliefs and values that develop within an organization and that guides the behavior of its members. So we know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Okay, so what drives organizational culture? How do we know what organizational culture is? One is through founders' values. This idea about, so you look at people like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett, Henry Ford, that kind of thing. What they believed, what their values were, are usually instilled early on in the organization and continue on, just like what you might see. A parent's values are going to be, imbued to their children, and there's a culture of the family, that kind of thing. Industry and business environment. So when we talk about that, the banking industry is going to have something different than a different type of culture than something, in say, a sports team or advertising or, a hospital, that kind of thing. So it's a different. What does the industry dictate, and also where in the cycle is the industry. National culture, of course, is going to inform what goes on within a company. So, a insurance company in the United States might have different types of value, different type of culture than, say, an insurance company in another country. Probably similar, but maybe a little different. Okay, visions and strategies. We talked about visions and strategies in the previous chapter. So, what is it how do they go about what do they want to become, and how do they go about that? And then behavior of leaders. How a leader behaves often indicates what it's going to be, what uh, what the behavior of the other people are in the organization is as well. Okay, so organizational structure, it's a formal system of tasks and reporting relationships that coordinates and motivates an organization's members so that they can work together to achieve the organizational goals. So how many levels of management are there? Who reports to who? Is the company divided up based on function, like, marketing, finance, that kind of thing? Or is it divided up based on region? Or is it divided up based on product? That kind of thing. So that's going to influence the culture. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, there's 3 levels of culture. Um, uh, observable artifacts. So, for example, when you walk into a company and you might see, information about the top executives, that will tell you that those are people who are very lauded. Maybe you walk in and you see examples of customer service awards, that kind of thing, that the customer is very important, or what their products are. The same thing, you walk into a school, and if you see all sorts of athletic trophies, and athletics are very important there. If you walk in and you see information about alumni, then they really are focused on alumni. That's just one example of observable artifacts. So espoused values are what people say are important, and then enacted values, of course, is what they actually do. They're not always the same. And then basic assumptions, they're not really observable, but they represent the core values of an organization's culture, and they tend to be taken for granted, and so they're not seen in terms of, the length of the workday, or, how people, in terms of, is it a 9 to 5 clock culture, and, people won't question that, or is it a place where people, work, if things are just assumed, that people work just, work and work and work and work, and they don't have necessarily any kind of feeling that they want or need to get out of there at a certain time. It could be an attitude towards social responsibility, all sorts of things. Basic assumptions are at the very, very heart of the organization, and as I said, difficult to necessarily see because they're very ingrained and also difficult to challenge. Okay, so there's 4 types of organizational culture. We're going to go through them one by one. Clan culture is a family type organization, and it encourages collaboration among employees, and it strives to encourage cohesion through consensus and job satisfaction, and to increase commitment through employee involvement. Clan organizations devote considerable resources to hiring and developing their employees, and they view customers as partners. So like we're all in it together, together we rise, together we fall, we're all working on the same team, and we're in it together. Adhocracy culture is a culture that attempts to create innovative products by being adaptable, creative, and quick to respond to changes in the marketplace. Employees are encouraged to take risks and experiment with new ways of getting things done. Adhocracy cultures are well suited for startup companies and those in industries undergoing constant change, and those in mature industries that are in need of innovation to enhance growth. We talked about a learning organization. An adhocracy would also be considered a learning organization, that this idea of constantly changing and keeping up with what's going on and new technologies and new market opportunities and that kind of thing, and having a management structure and attitude that really supports that kind of thing. Okay, so market culture is the third one. That's focused on the external environment, and it's really driven by competition and a strong desire to deliver results. Customers' productivity and profits take precedence over employee development and satisfaction, and employees are expected to work hard, react fast, and deliver quality work on time. Those who deliver results are rewarded. Hierarchy culture has more of an internal focus. Companies with this kind of culture are apt to have a formalized structured work environment aimed at achieving effectiveness through a variety of control mechanisms that measure efficiency, timeliness, and reliability in the creation and delivery of products. So it's very, very structured, very rule-based, very structured and rule-based. Okay, let's take a look at the visual representation of that. You can see here, so it's on the one hand, flexibility and discretion in terms of ability to make your own, being empowered to make your own decisions, versus stability and control, that the top has control and things don't change very much, and people beneath have to do what the people above say, and that's just that. And then on the other side is this whole idea of internal focus, looking at the market and changing with the market, as opposed to focusing on focusing externally, and trying to see what's internal focus, just looking at the company; external focus, just looking at what is going on in the environment and trying to respond to that, and trying to look for the company to remain as relevant as possible. Okay, so we've been talking about culture, but how do you find out what it is? So employees learn culture through a variety of different ways: symbols, stories, heroes, rites and rituals, organizational socialization. So symbols is some sort of object, act, whatever, event that conveys meaning to others. So maybe it's, as I was mentioning earlier, maybe it's the, twice a year, everybody gets together and works on a habitat project. Social responsibility is important. Or maybe it's, as I said, like what's featured in the front lobby of the organization. Is it customer focused, product focused, executive focused, that kind of thing. Stories are stories that are talked about, about leaders, or anecdotes of things that have gone on, how people are in the past, how people are hired, how the company started, a great success that they had, some sort of project that everybody worked on and went to great lengths to make sure it happened, that kind of thing. Heroes, people whose accomplishments embody the values of the organization, oftentimes the founder of the organization, or there'll be certain stars throughout the history of the organization that they talk about. Rites and rituals, activities, ceremonies. So it could be an annual picnic. It could be a weekly employee meetings or free lunches or that kind of thing. And then organizational socialization, essentially how long and how people learn the values, norms, and required behaviors of the organization. So how long does that happen? How long does that take? and are people easily accepted into an organization or not? All right, so who cares, man? Who cares about culture? Everyone cares about culture because you want to be happy and you want to be comfortable where you are. And there's no necessarily one right or one wrong culture. It's everyone has a culture that they will fit into. The question is trying to find that culture that you're going to fit into. And so there are great organizational benefits. Job satisfaction, of course, being one of the most important, and organizational commitment. It's the idea that you're going to go above and beyond the call of duty to make sure that things happen. So you can go through in terms of what's the relationship between the type of culture and how strong that relationship is. Okay, so what do we learn from that? We learned a few things. So that culture matters, and that there, different cultures are going to tell us different things. Employees have positive work experiences with clan cultures. Customer satisfaction is greater with clan and market cultures because people probably relate to it more. The operational outcomes and quality and innovation are found in clan adhocracy and market cultures more than they are in hierarchical cultures, probably because the hierarchical culture is so tight, and that can sometimes stifle people. So financial performance usually doesn't have anything to do with culture. It may not. Generally speaking, it doesn't. And if it does, it's kind of hard to measure. And companies with market cultures, because they're so outwardly focused, usually have more positive organizational outcomes in terms of productivity. All right, so we've been talking about this a little bit, and then you think, so where do I fit into this, and how do I know about culture? And there's all sorts of different ways to know about culture, but they also want to know, when they're interviewing you, if you're going to fit into their culture. You can find out about culture by reading about them, talking to people, observing things when you go in. The more you become familiar with the idea of culture, the more trained you'll be when you walk into an office and see what's going on. Is it a sea of cubicles? Do people have private offices? How much, what's on the walls, that kind of thing. So anyway, so that's your side. But for them to get to know you, they might ask you some questions in a job interview to kind of get to know essentially your personality. And these are just some things you talk out. Your favorite movie, website. They're trying to get a feel for you. What do you do when you're not at work? Who are you when you're not at work? And there wants to be some sort of fit with the organization. Okay, so how can organizations change organizational culture? So one is through this whole idea of formal statements, mission, and values. You probably get an employee handbook when you start working there. What kind of language is used? What kind of slogans might exist within the company? Oftentimes you'll see, you walk into a company, you might see something that says, walk the walk, talk the talk. What is it? Like, there are 0 defects. You're focusing on that kind of thing. So it's something to remind people on a daily basis. Shooting for excellence, trying to win the Stanley Cup. Here to win the Stanley Cup, or future Stanley Cup champions, whatever it may be. Rites and rituals, of course, we talked about what those are, changing what those are. Stories, legends, and myths that arise, things that people talk about. Managerial responses to critical incidents. There's a famous incident quite a few years ago when JetBlue got stuck on a tarmac for 11 hours and people were not allowed to get on or off, and they were at the airport, but for some reason they were delayed, and that would drive most people a little bit bananas. That would make me nuts if I had to stay in an airplane for 11 hours with not going anywhere. And the next morning, the CEO of JetBlue said, I don't know what happened, but I know it's my fault. I'm the CEO, and if something goes wrong, I'm responsible for it. I'm going to figure it out, and I'll let you know. So it's taking really taking responsibility for what they are doing, all actions and behaviors. So also role modeling, training, and coaching. Who are the mentors in the organization? And who do people look up to? People model behavior. Our whole lives, we tend to model behavior. So it's important that the company sets out good examples. All right, physical design, as I mentioned earlier about this whole idea of, is it a sea of cubicles? Is it, an open office form? Is it, people, are there certain levels that are executive levels and no one else is allowed on them? Are, people from all levels of the organization dispersed throughout the whole physical building? Is it a completely telecommuting company? Is it a virtual company? So rewards, titles, promotions, and bonuses, how are those passed out? What titles do people have? How are promotions decided? How you establish goals and performance criteria. Measurable and controllable activities. So if you're measuring, are you measuring customer satisfaction? Are you measuring, what's the most important measure? Are you measuring, uh, you know, production rates? Are you measuring stock price? That kind of thing. What is it that you're focusing at? Changing the structure from a very tall organization, say with many levels of management, to a flatter organization where people are more equal. And then using organizational systems and procedures, how do you actually get things done? Okay, so now we're on to here. 3 types of organizations. For-profit organizations, traditional organization in a company that's in business to make money. Nonprofit organizations formed to service clients, and mutual benefit is to advance the members' interests. So a union, a trade association, that kind of thing. So just so we know what we're talking about when we talk about organizations. All right, so here's an example of a organizational chart that we've been talking a little bit about this. It's an example, it's a hospital. So you have the board of directors, and then underneath them is the chief executive officer. Those dotted lines seem like there's a reporting connection between those two, and then that they might not necessarily report to that person, but they might not necessarily control that person, but they share information, and then as it goes down. So it's relatively flat. It's a relatively flat organization, but that just gives you an idea. Every organization has a different chart. Okay, so what are some common elements of all organizations? And regardless if it's a nonprofit, profit, mutual benefit organization, they have a variety of elements in common in terms of, they all have a common purpose. There's some coordinated effort, division, labor, work is divided up, and there is some level of hierarchy. All organizations have that. That's just fundamental to an organization. And you need to have that to get the organization going. Okay, so there are other ones. Span of control, it's a number of people that report to a given manager. You either have a large or a narrow. Some places have, 50 people that report to one person, and some people have 2 people that report. There's 30 people to whom, 2 people report each. Authority is the idea of who has the authority to get things done, and delegate things and sign off on things. And then centralized versus decentralized authority. Where are those decisions made? Okay, so let's just take a look at another graph and chart here. Line positions and staff positions. So line positions, line managers have authority to make decisions and usually have people reporting to them. So, for example, the president and vice president, director of personnel, head of accounting. Line positions are indicated by a solid line. And then staff positions, staff personnel have authority functions, and they provide advice, recommendations, and research to line managers. So those are indicated by the dotted line. Okay, so basic types of organizations. There's a couple different basic types of organizational structures. A simple structure is the authority is centralized in a single person. Few rules and low work specialization. Small firms tend to be have this structure. And really, hundreds of thousands of organizations are arranged according to simple structure. So, small mom and pop firms, construction companies, that kind of thing. Okay, so functional structure is a little different. Functional structure is this idea that people with similar occupational specialties are put together in formal groups. So it's pretty commonplace in for-profit or for-profit. So you see there's finance, production, HR. Okay, divisional structure. Divisional structure again is a little bit different again. Um, you can have product divisions, customer divisions, or geographic divisions. So product divisions would be based on, you know, if it's a communications company, video, newspaper, magazine, maybe it is. Customer division might be based on either amount of customers, $100,000 or $100 million and above, or how much money they spend, or what type of customer they are, industrial, commercial, residential, that kind of thing. And then they also could have geographic divisions, Northwest, Southeast, European markets, Asian markets, that kind of thing. Okay, and then there's also the matrix structure. The matrix structure combines functional and divisional chains of command in a grid so that there's two command structures, vertical and horizontal. Functional structure usually doesn't change, and these are the organization's normal departments or divisions, such as finance, marketing, production, and research and development. And the divisional structure can vary by product, brand, customer, or geographic region. So you kind of see that's a good, again, visual representation of that. Okay, so basic types of organizational structures. Horizontal also can be called team-based. Teams of work groups, either temporary or permanent, are used to improve collaboration and work on shared tasks by breaking down internal boundaries. That's generally speaking the horizontal design. You could also have cross-functional teams that you can focus on anyway, it's more narrow focus. Okay, then there's also the network structure. Really, it's the opposite of bureaucracy. With network structure is opposite. Network structure is opposite of bureaucracy. It has numerous barriers and divisions. It's a boundaryless. The boundaryless organization is more fluid. It's highly adaptive organization whose members are linked by information technology and come together to collaborate on common tasks. The collaborators may include not only coworkers but also suppliers, customers, and even competitors. And it means that the form of business is ever changing and business relationships are informal. So it's this idea that that everyone's connected. It's not at different levels and different functions, that kind of thing. So hollow structure, in the hollow structure, it's often called the network structure. And the organization has a central core of key functions and outsources other functions to vendors who can do them cheaper or faster. And a company with a hollow structure might retain such important core processes as design or marketing and outsource most other processes such as human resources, warehousing, distribution. That's the idea that they're hollowing out the organization. Okay, there's also the modular structure. Modular structure differs from hollow structure in that it's oriented around outsourcing certain pieces of a product rather than outsourcing certain processes, such as the processes will be human resources or warehousing. So in a modular structure, a firm assembles products chunks or modules and provided by outside contractors. For example, airplanes, automobiles would be something like that. So it's almost like they assemble them. Okay, there's also the virtual organization. Virtual structure, it's an organization whose members are geographically separated, usually working through email and other forms of information technology, yet which generally appear to customers as a single unified organization with a real physical location. We don't know the difference because of the fact that we don't actually visit the place. We don't need to visit the place. That's a virtual organization. Web services, that kind of thing. It's virtual organization and virtual structure, both. Okay, contingency design. It's a process of fitting an organization into its environment. So, and what's going on, that could be geographic environment. It could be the environment in terms of what's going on and the external environment at the time, and what's going on in the economy, that kind of thing. So contingency is figuring out what's best at the moment for what's happening. Okay, let's just quickly look at a mechanistic versus an organic organization. Mechanistic organizations, authority tends to be centralized. There's a lot of rules. It's very formal. Whereas in the organic organization, things are a little bit looser. We talked about the learning organization might be the organic organization. So it's just sort of a style. It's a you can have an organic organization that's a modular organization. This would fall they would fall on top of each other. They fold over each other, I should say. Okay, differentiation versus integration. Differentiation, it's this impulse towards dispersal that arises because of technical specialization and division of labor. And as a result, specialists behave in specific delimited ways without coordinating with other parts of the organization. So, for example, a company producing dental floss, deodorants, and other personal care products might have different product divisions, each with its own production facility and sales staff. So that would be a differentiated organization. Integration, on the other hand, is in a highly integrated organization. The specialists work together to achieve a common goal. So the means for achieving this are a formal chain of command, standardization of rules and procedures, and use of cross-functional teams and computer networks so that there is a frequent communication and coordination of the parts. Okay, so all the organizational cultures and structures described are used because they have some sort of advantage that makes them appropriate for some cases and disadvantages that make them not useful for others. So it's the idea is that you want to make sure that you have what's working best for you at the moment. So and the culture might, as a company gets bigger and bigger, it might need a more complicated culture, or it might have a more complicated structure. It might require more lines of authority, that kind of thing. So the idea is that you want to make sure that we know that culture and structure are related, but we also want to make sure that the strategy is considered as well. So sometimes in order to grow, you're going to have to change your structure. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense to you. That we live in this ever-changing world, and in ever-changing marketplaces. So you need to be adaptable and flexible. Okay, so that's it on Chapter 8, Organizational Culture and Design, and we will be back with Chapter 9 when we talk about human resources management. Okay, thanks guys.